Ollie Remold boarded Flight 2223 in Houston, but the usual hum of pre-flight activity felt distant, muffled. The dull ache in her shoulders, the grit behind her eyes. These were the familiar companions of too many late nights and early mornings spent hunched over research papers, grant proposals, and now, the endless stream of worry that had taken up residence in her chest. It wasn't just the usual travel fatigue. It was a deeper exhaustion, the kind that settled in your bones. Her mother's recent heart attack had been a brutal, unexpected blow. Ollie remembered her mother's hands, strong and capable, kneading dough for their weekly Sunday bread, her laughter echoing through their small kitchen. Now, those same hands had trembled, clutching at her chest, her face contorted in pain during that terrifying phone call. The image was seared into Ollie's mind. The airport, usually a place of transient energy, felt oppressive today. The echoing announcements, the clatter of rolling suitcases, the scent of stale coffee and jet fuel. It all swirled around her, yet she barely registered it. She was a ghost moving through a bustling world, her mind a million miles away, tethered to a hospital room and a fragile heartbeat. She found her seat, 22B, a window seat thankfully, and sank into it with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. She sent a quick, "boarding now," text to her sister, the words feeling inadequate to convey the turmoil inside her. As she leaned back, the pre-flight safety demonstration began, a routine she'd heard countless times. But the carefully constructed wall of calm she'd built around herself was about to be shattered. Meanwhile, on the other side of the sprawling Houston airport, Captain David Witson had just completed a routine flight from Denver. He wasn't scheduled to be anywhere near Flight 2223. He wasn't even on duty. But as he glanced at the crew manifest on his company tablet, a name leaped off the screen: Ollie Remold. His heart stuttered, a hummingbird trapped in his chest. A jolt of adrenaline, sharp and unexpected, surged through him. He felt a sudden pressure behind his eyes, a tightness in his throat. It couldn't be, could it? He stared at the name, his mind racing. Was this crazy? Was he overstepping? A wave of doubt washed over him, quickly followed by a surge of something far stronger, an unshakable, visceral need. The memory of lying in that sterile hospital bed, the chilling pronouncements of the doctors, the fear that gnawed at his insides. It all came flooding back. He remembered the feeling of his wife's hand in his, her silent tears, the agonizing uncertainty. He had to see her. He had to. "Excuse me, Captain Thompson," David said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the internal earthquake. He approached the captain of Flight 2223, a man he knew only vaguely. The conversation was brief, tense. Thompson's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you sure, David? This is highly unusual." David explained, his words tumbling over each other, emphasizing the urgency, the life-or-death connection, the years of unspoken gratitude. He could see the initial hesitation in Thompson's eyes, the weighing of protocol against the raw emotion in David's plea. Finally, Thompson nodded, a curt, "All right, Witson, but make it quick." David practically ran. The airport, once a familiar landscape, became an obstacle course. The flashing lights of the gate signs blurred, snippets of conversations. A child's laughter, a businessman's harried phone call, faded into a background hum. He felt the weight of his uniform, the fabric suddenly too tight, constricting his breath. Each step was a race against time, a gamble that the plane hadn't already pushed back from the gate. The rhythmic thump of his heart echoed in his ears. Asterisk, please be there. Please be there, asterisk. Back on Flight 2223, Ollie was lost in a haze of worry and fragmented memories. She absently watched the other passengers file in, a blur of faces and luggage. The cabin was almost full, the air thick with the anticipation of departure. She reached for her bag, intending to retrieve her headphones and drown out the world, but the PA system crackled to life. At first, she thought it was a routine announcement, a welcome message, a reminder about seatbelts. Then, she heard it. Would passenger Ollie Remold please identify herself to a flight attendant? Her breath hitched. Had she misheard? Was there another Ollie Remold? Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for a clue, a flicker of recognition in the faces of the flight attendants. A prickling sensation crawled across her skin. Her mouth went dry, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The announcement repeated, her name echoing through the cabin, each syllable a hammer blow against her composure. The carefully constructed facade of calm she'd maintained began to crumble. Slowly, she raised her hand, a hesitant gesture. A flight attendant approached, her expression questioning. "Ollie Remold?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ollie nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The flight attendant's smile seemed to falter slightly, a flicker of something Ollie couldn't quite decipher. "Just one moment, please." Then she looked up, and she saw him. The years melted away like ice in the sun, and she was 22 again, a naive college student with a head full of dreams and a heart full of, well, she wasn't sure what. It wasn't his uniform, though it was certainly striking. It was the shape of his eyes, the slight crinkle at the corners when he smiled, the set of his jaw, the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that had always drawn her in, even back then. It was David Witson. The intervening years had etched lines on his face, a testament to battles fought and won. But his eyes held the same warmth, the same intensity she remembered. And something more, a profound gratitude that radiated outwards, enveloping her in its glow. The backstory unfolded, not in a linear fashion, but in a series of interwoven flashbacks, alternating between Ollie's and David's perspectives. It hadn't been entirely on a whim. Ollie's aunt had battled leukemia years earlier, a fight she'd ultimately lost. The memory of her aunt's weakened state, the constant hospital visits, had left a mark on Ollie. So, when the bone marrow registry drive came to campus, it felt personal, even though she didn't know anyone currently needing a transplant. The swabbing of her cheek had been quick, almost anticlimactic. She'd filled out the forms, tucked the information packet into her backpack, and largely forgotten about it. Life had moved on. Then, the phone call. She remembered the sterile, unfamiliar number flashing on her phone screen. She'd almost let it go to voicemail. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, yet tinged with a quiet urgency. "Ms. Remold, my name is Sarah, and I'm calling from the match registry. We have a patient who is a potential match for you." Ollie's initial reaction was disbelief. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. Then, the reality of it began to sink in. Someone, somewhere, was desperately ill, and she, Ollie, might be their only hope. The decision was instantaneous, a reflex, a gut-level response. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, I'll do it." The simplicity of that yes belied the profound impact it would have. The diagnosis had hit him like a freight train. He remembered the sterile, white walls of the doctor's office, the antiseptic smell, the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Dr. Evans, a man he'd known for years, had delivered the news with a grim face and carefully chosen words. Acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive, prognosis, not good. David had felt the world tilt on its axis. He saw his wife, Sarah, sitting beside him, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. He saw his children, their smiling faces in a photograph on his desk, and a wave of despair washed over him. He was 45 years old, a pilot, a husband, a father. He had plans, dreams, a life he wasn't ready to leave. The chemotherapy was brutal. He remembered the nausea, the bone-deep fatigue, the hair loss. He'd look in the mirror and see a stranger staring back at him, gaunt and hollow-eyed. He felt like he was disappearing, fading away. The hope that had initially sustained him began to dwindle. The doctors had given him a 5% chance. 5%. Then, the call from Dr. Evans. "David, we have a potential match." A perfect match. David had held his breath, afraid to believe it. A perfect match? It seemed impossible. He learned only a few details. A young woman, a student, living in California. Her name was Ollie. He pictured her, this anonymous angel, this stranger who held his life in her hands. He felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude, a desperate, fervent hope. Ollie remembered the slight prick of the needle, the 4 lines, the hours spent in a hospital bed, feeling strangely detached from her own body. It was uncomfortable, yes, but nothing compared to what she imagined David was going through. David remembered the feeling of the new cells entering his bloodstream, a slow, steady drip of hope. He imagined them, these tiny warriors, battling the cancer that ravaged his body. He felt a profound connection to this unknown woman, this Ollie, who had given him a second chance. David stood at the front of the cabin, his voice slightly hoarse, his hands trembling slightly. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I apologize for this interruption, but I have something I need to say. Someone I need to thank." He looked directly at Ollie, his eyes locking with hers. The years melted away, and they were connected again, not by a sterile hospital room, but by a shared experience, a bond forged in the crucible of life and death. He told the story, his voice filled with emotion. He spoke of his illness, his despair, his desperate hope. He spoke of Ollie, the stranger who had saved his life, the woman who had given him the chance to see his children grow up, to celebrate anniversaries with his wife, to fly again. He mentioned specific milestones: his daughter's graduation, his son's first soccer goal, his 20th wedding anniversary. Moments he wouldn't have witnessed without Ollie's selfless act. "Ollie," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I owe you everything. You are my hero. You are family." The applause erupted spontaneously, a wave of sound that filled the cabin. Ollie felt her cheeks flush, tears welling up in her eyes. She was overwhelmed, not just by David's words, but by the raw emotion in the air, the shared humanity of the moment. She saw faces in the crowd, some teary-eyed, some smiling, all reflecting the profound impact of the story. He walked towards her, his steps measured, his eyes never leaving hers. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the unspoken connection between them palpable. Then he reached out and embraced her. It wasn't just a hug. It was an embrace of life itself. It was a release of years of pent-up gratitude, a silent acknowledgement of the extraordinary bond they shared. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated human connection. She felt the strength in his arms, the warmth of his body, the tremor of emotion that ran through him. As the plane continued its journey, Ollie stared out the window, the events of the past hour replaying in her mind. The world outside was a blur of clouds and sky, but her inner world was sharp, clear. Her mother's heart attack, David's illness, her own small act of kindness. It all seemed interconnected, a reminder of life's fragility and the profound importance of human connection. This experience had given her a new perspective, a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps, she thought, she would become more involved in promoting bone marrow donation, sharing her story, inspiring others to take that small step that could make such a monumental difference. David, after landing, called his wife. His voice, though choked with emotion, bubbled with a renewed sense of joy and appreciation. He told her about Ollie, about the unexpected reunion, about the overwhelming gratitude that filled him. He knew he would live every day to the fullest, cherishing every moment, every connection, every breath. In the vast expanse of the sky, 2 lives, once separated by chance, were now bound by a gift that transcended distance and time, a testament to the enduring power of human kindness, and a potent reminder that even the smallest acts can ripple outwards, changing lives in ways we can scarcely imagine.